Hello.
Hi.
This is Assandra Colbung. Her dad was Noongar leader Ken Colbung.
Because of who Dad was, he was a senior lawman, and one of the prized possessions that he had was his red headband. It was one of his trademarks of who he was. People see him, they knew just from the red headband of who he was.
So where does Yagan and Ken's story intersect?
Probably even before my time, I would say.
Ken Colbung was a soldier who served Australia in Japan and the Korean War. But he also had another mission.
Yagan's head was taken to England as a trophy last century. Ken Colbung wants the skull brought home to Western Australia for burial.
We need to get him back, find him and get him back.
Ken spent decades amassing any information or records on what happened to Yagan's head.
It was actually 30 years of research that he'd done to find Yagan.
But Ken wasn't alone in his quest. Back in the 1990s, Cressida Ford and Lyndon Orman Parker were put in contact with Ken.
Ken had a big file. Like, he'd been doing his work as much as he possibly could, using all these ways that were available to him.
And he never wavered from his search for Yagan.
And that search paid off when one day Ken Colbung got a crucial piece of evidence.
A clipping saying that Yagan's head had been on display in London. So then the first obvious thing is you give it to the local museum.
That would be the Liverpool Museum.
I was talking with one of the curators, and this wonderful woman said, well, I think we buried some remains in the 1960s in the local cemetery. Let me go and pull you the file. And in that file there was administrative correspondence about the need to bury the head of Yagan.
It was just joy to see how Dad reacted. It's a sense of relief of we're getting that little bit closer.
But the thing is, when they did find where he was buried in the UK, he wasn't buried down there alone.
When Yagan was buried, it was a pauper's grave, and of course they buried other people. You weren't just buried by yourself.
The problem is, it's now beneath the bodies of 22 babies, and some families have refused permission for the remains to be moved.
Then hence became a long process of trying to lobby the British government for an exhumation licence.
We know that the end of the road is near and that we will return with Yagan's head to Australia.
And that's who Dad was. He made sure that if he was going to follow through with a task, he did it.
Ken actually tried to get permission from the families of all of those stillborn babies. But what if there was another way?
So then the idea that was being discussed is, well, could you remove the box from the side without disturbing the children above?
Go down the next plot over and use survey equipment to sense the metal hinges of Yagan's box.
And they started very early in the morning, I think about 4 o'clock in the morning. They emptied the grave next door. Then they began retrieving the box and then found Yagan.
Seeing them come through the gates with the box and that, I guess it was a sense of relief having him back on home soil to be buried in Budja. Sadly, my father didn't get to see that because it was only 6 months prior that we lost him from when we buried Yagan.
After all this,
yeah,
he didn't get to see him reburied.
No, which was quite sad, but, you know, I know that their spirits would have been connected somewhere along the line.
I believe that the spirit of his old father could be inside of me, probably on the reincarnation of that spiritual being.